These files were never meant to be public, but someone reopened them. This is the Dark Bureau. Power is seldom relinquished or lost. It migrates, evolving in form while remaining equally potent and elusive. In the machinery of global finance, this phenomenon takes on a complexity that baffles even vigilant watchdogs. Across vast continents, the world's wealth does not simply reside within the vaults of revered corporate headquarters or national treasuries. Instead, it is propelled deliberately and quietly into liminal zones where solicitors and bankers manufacture legal ambiguity. The theatre is always a step ahead of the audience, as governance tries to illuminate these shadowed corners, the set morphs, the actors don new roles, and the curtain pulls back to reveal a stage wholly rearranged. Every intervention, every rule, spurs a fresh mode of evasion. Trusts are layered within shell companies, facts are nested behind proxies, and nominal paperwork sprawls across a spiderweb of offshore destinations. It is a perpetual cat-and-mouse game, and the rules favour those able to adapt their secrecy with a speed that law alone can rarely match. This architecture is no mere map of villains and their victims, nor a drama of rogue operators alone. Rather, it is an elaborate design, where laws intended to halt illicit enrichment are swiftly outmanoeuvred by bespoke exceptions. Hundreds of jurisdictions, each with a different regulatory framework, compete to attract capital through corporate flexibility. The result, a single office building in an island territory may serve as the legal residence of thousands of unconnected companies, each buffered by an array of registered agents, nominee directors, and time-limited paperwork. Regulators and compliance officers are thus confronted by a formidable adversary, one not defined by organisational size or criminal intent, but by a distributed mode of operation, a culture of legal innovation, and an alliance of professionals who thrive in ambiguity. Accountants, lawyers, and bankers traverse borders without friction, trading not only in assets, but also in methods. Best practices for erasing the trail, guidance on the legitimate limits of visibility, and policies that transform risk into normal business. The individual tactics woven into this broader system are engineered for flexibility and plausible deniability. Shell companies spring up almost algorithmically, their existence sometimes calculated in months, other times in decades. Chains of ostensible ownership are stitched between disparate havens. A holding firm in the British Virgin Islands may be controlled from Cyprus, with beneficial owners obscured under a Singaporean trust, all buffered by intermediaries in Luxembourg or the Channel Islands. With every additional step, the real source of power grows increasingly indistinct on paper, guarded by contracts written to resist scrutiny. When international agencies demand clarity, they are met with cold deflections, bank secrecy laws, data protection privileges, or simple bureaucratic inaction. The professionals orchestrating these chains respond with the meticulous detachment of technicians, presenting only what the law compels. Investigative journalists and financial crime units confront a shifting morass. To trace even a single transaction, they must assemble fragments scattered across languages, regulatory regimes, and chronologies. What begins as an inquiry into one shell company soon intersects with a dozen others, each a node in a greater design. Forensic analysts and public interest advocates devote months or years to cross-referencing names, IP addresses, and corporate filings. Often, their discoveries are incomplete. A director whose name repeats through unrelated entities. A law office fielding paperwork on behalf of dozens of foreign nationals. The process is slow and resource-intensive, requiring skills drawn from law, data science, accounting, and more. Even small advances, a name, a date, a signature, can bring the system momentarily into focus, before it slips again into opacity. The appeal of these offshoring techniques extends well beyond criminal circles. major multinational corporations structure entire tax planning operations around regulatory arbitrage, seeking the lowest common denominator across disparate jurisdictions. Ultra-wealthy individuals employ the same methods, masking inheritance, real estate, art, or even luxury goods beneath shell entities and special purpose vehicles. The logic is both strategic and systematic. Minimize taxes, avoid compulsory disclosure, and retain the flexibility to move or conceal assets without breaching, strictly speaking, the law. Cities such as London, Zurich, Hong Kong, and Dubai have built thriving financial service sectors by selling select clients not just market access, but the lure of discretion, influencer-driven introductions, and, critically, legitimate insulation from prying eyes. In these global nodes, entire legal communities are professionally oriented not toward challenging secrecy, but preserving it as a product. The headlines that periodically shake this illusion, sparked by data leaks, whistleblower dumps, or consortia of journalists, offer only a partial map of the ecosystem at work. Each exposé, whether naming a head of state or billionaire entrepreneur, temporarily brings individual tactics to light. How nominee directors are replaced by purpose-built trusts. How charitable foundations are hybridized to create new ambiguities. How even the tools of compliance, audits, due diligence are sometimes leveraged to mask rather than reveal. The underlying strength of this global system is found in its capacity for reconfiguration. Every legislative reform is rapidly studied, deconstructed, and re-engineered into the next workaround, directed by highly paid teams who know precisely where the letter of the law ends and creative compliance begins. For law enforcement and policy advocates, the task of following the money is a challenge not only of technical capacity, but of political will, requiring endurance and cross-border trust. When authorities attempt to freeze criminal or illicit assets, they often discover that each transaction traverses multiple legal territories, splitting the burden for disclosure and complicating jurisdiction at every step. Seizures, if they occur, often come years after the fact, by which point new structures in newer jurisdictions, with updated paperwork, have already taken the stage. Meanwhile, the ecosystem of intermediaries adapts. Law firms open in new havens, advisory businesses rebrand, and compliance departments rewrite training to endorse the latest tactics. The cycle perpetuates not because of legal failure alone, but due to a dispersed incentive: the financial gain for professionals, the fiscal interest of host economies, the safe haven sought by global capital. From a structural perspective, the proliferation of these shadow financial channels reconfigures the relationship between states and markets, with grave consequences for governance everywhere. States lose not only revenue, untaxed profits, forfeited confiscations, and decaying compliance, but also policy sovereignty, as political influence is funneled back through campaign contributions and lobbying paid with offshore funds. National oversight mechanisms are, almost by definition, outmatched by a borderless digital marketplace. Regulatory action, such as the European Union system of beneficial ownership registers or recent US mandates for company formation disclosure, marks genuine progress. Yet each advance provokes an equally creative response. Shell companies transform into bespoke trusts. Legal opinions are drafted to reclassify arrangements. New frontiers of digital assets, such as cryptocurrencies or decentralized finance, emerge as the next contested spaces. Journalism and civil society play an indispensable role as systemic watchdogs. The painstaking assembly of leaks like the Panama Papers represents not just an inventory of misdeeds, but a diagnosis of systemic vulnerability, lapses in bank compliance, failures in auditing, and evidence of complicity by white shoe law officers whose clients include both state leaders and sanctioned criminals. Media teams join forces with whistleblowers, analysts, lawyers, and advocates, labouring to decipher intentionally obscure flows of wealth and document the real implications for society. Their efforts periodically force consequences: high-profile resignations, lawsuits, hurried governmental inquiries. But these victories are partial and precarious. Cases stall in court, legislative proposals are quietly sabotaged, and, in the shadow of each public scandal, the underlying system persists, only changing costume as necessary. Each public leak provokes a ripple of institutional introspection and attempted response. Policy panels are convened, regulatory agencies recalibrate oversight, international watchdogs like the OECD and FATF scramble to reinforce coordination and encourage more transparent reporting. There is growing acknowledgement among policymakers of the need for harmonised registers, universal standards for client due diligence, and timely sharing of suspicious activity reports. Yet these reforms often confront resistance at every level. Financial sectors in island economies or private banking centres point to job creation and local prosperity as justification for deferring or weakening reforms. An entire political economy has grown up around the business of secrecy. Insurance, legal translation, compliance consulting, real estate, all of which lobby furiously to preserve the advantageous status quo. In legislatures, ambitious anti-secrecy proposals are eroded by industry input. In regulatory corridors, priorities are refocused elsewhere, and effective enforcement is continually hamstrung by lack of resourcing and chronic skill shortages. The real-world impacts of these hidden regimes are profound and sharply felt. National tax authorities tally annual losses in the hundreds of billions, a sum with immediate social consequences. These are funds that could support hospitals, ensure access to schools, provide community infrastructure, or fund elder and disability care. Meanwhile, public faith in the fairness of the system erodes. When the rules are regularly subverted by the wealthy or connected, while ordinary citizens face punitive enforcement, confidence in equal justice and political legitimacy is inevitably undermined. For corruption investigators and reform campaigners, every legislative win is met with a hydra-headed evolution of avoidance. More intricate legal entities, more tenacious advocates, deeper silos between authorities. The net result is increased societal cynicism, as wealth is seen not merely as unequally distributed, but also as immune from challenge, covertly shaping who has power, who receives services, and who is heard in the corridors of authority. Reforms do bring progress, though seldom at the speed and scope needed. Some nations now require public registers, recording the ultimate owners of companies. Some banks toughen screening and vetting. Cross-jurisdictional enforcement has improved through treaty networks and data exchange. New regulations in the EU and the US set out stronger disclosure demands for corporate ownership, and international cooperation on asset recovery is growing. Yet innovation on the side of secrecy remains relentless. When transparency measures extend to companies, the system shifts to trusts. When banks face tighter oversight, private wealth moves to alternative asset classes or unregulated intermediaries. National governments, hamstrung by urgent demands elsewhere, struggle to upgrade their enforcement infrastructure, retain legal expertise, or resist de facto capture by local economic interests benefiting from the offshore flow. The cycle thus repeats itself. Exposure, public outrage, tepid legislative improvement, bureaucratic inertia, and the re-emergence of the machinery in a slightly altered form. The underlying network is now fully global, deeply digital, and tightly enmeshed with both the reputable and the scandal-ridden elements of financial life. For citizens and democracies, the greater danger is not merely fiscal, it is existential, corroding basic trust that markets can play fair and that power can be held to account. The architecture of offshoring is not simply a technology of finance, but a driver of social fracture, hardening economic divides and amplifying the voice of money in policy making. Looking forward, the The central question is not whether another scandal will emerge. History suggests leaks and investigations will continue, but whether societies can convert periodic awareness into sustained institutional change. That will require more than clever regulation. It demands constant pressure for transparency, robust cross-border collaboration, and ongoing accountability for the individuals and firms who design, maintain, and profit from secrecy. Only with determined investigation, reform, and a willingness to challenge entrenched interests can the outlines of global finance be rendered not just visible, but responsive to the public good. The game persists, but each exposé maps a little more of the terrain, and each collective effort shortens the shadows in which hidden wealth once safely resided.